The dojo was quiet that afternoon. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the heavy kind, thick with humidity and the ghost of 1,000 strikes absorbed by leather bags hanging from chains. Century Martial Arts Academy, West Los Angeles, 1972. The address was 1947 South La Cienega Boulevard, a converted warehouse that smelled of sweat, liniment, and ambition. Sunlight cut through high windows in hard geometric slabs, illuminating dust particles that drifted like snow in the stale air. Bruce Lee stood near the center of the training floor, 5'7", 135 pounds of coiled precision. He wore simple black cotton pants and a white t-shirt darkened with sweat at the collar and underarms. His movements were methodical as he worked the wooden dummy, each strike a conversation, question, answer, question, answer. The sound was rhythmic, controlled. His breathing matched the tempo perfectly. Around him, a dozen students watched. Some were working heavy bags with less grace, their punches telegraphed and heavy-footed. Others practiced forms, their stances wide and stable. But most were watching him. They always watched him. There was something magnetic about the way he moved, economical, surgical, as if every motion had been distilled down to its essential core, stripped of everything ornamental or wasteful. Outside, Los Angeles breathed its usual chaos. Traffic hummed on La Cienega. Someone was arguing in the parking lot about a fender bender. A radio somewhere played Marvin Gaye. But inside the dojo, there was only the rhythm of training, the smell of effort, and the unspoken understanding that this space demanded something more than most people were willing to give. Bruce finished his sequence and stepped back from the dummy, rolling his shoulders. His face was calm, nearly expressionless, but his eyes held that particular intensity, the kind that made people uncomfortable if they looked too long. Not aggression. Something deeper. Awareness. Presence. One of his senior students, a stocky man named Daniel with a brown belt and calloused knuckles, approached with a towel. He handed it over without speaking, and Bruce nodded his thanks, wiping his face and neck. The motion was automatic, his mind clearly elsewhere. Then the door opened. The sound cut through the room's rhythm like a record scratch. Everyone turned. A man entered, 6 feet tall, maybe more, built like a heavyweight boxer because that's exactly what he was. Mid-20s, African-American, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorframe. He wore street clothes, jeans and a leather jacket despite the heat, and moved with the particular swagger of someone who he'd never been told no in a physical confrontation. His eyes scanned the room with casual dismissiveness before landing on Bruce. The air changed. Even the newest students felt it, that electric shift when two apex predators occupy the same space. The visitor walked forward slowly, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. He stopped about 10 feet from Bruce, tilted his head slightly, and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that precedes violence or humiliation, the kind that says, "I'm about to enjoy this." His voice was deep, resonant, carrying easily across the silent dojo. "You're the one they're all talking about, the kung fu movie guy." Bruce set the towel down on a bench nearby. His expression didn't change. He didn't respond immediately, just studied the man with that same calm intensity he directed at the wooden dummy moments before. "Bruce Lee," the visitor continued, taking another step forward. "The philosopher. The guy who thinks he can fight." He chuckled, a low rumbling sound. "I've been hearing your name a lot lately. People saying you're fast, saying you're tough, saying you're some kind of master." The word master was delivered with particular mockery, stretched out and emphasized. Bruce remained still. His hands hung loosely at his sides. His breathing was even. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, measured, with that slight accent that never quite left him, no matter how many years he spent in America. "You've been hearing many things." "Yeah," the visitor smiled wider. "I have, and I'm curious. See where I come from? We settle curiosity, real simple. We test it. We see if the talk matches the walk." He cracked his knuckles deliberately, one hand then the other. The sound was sharp and aggressive. "So I'm thinking, you think you're tough?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Several students shifted nervously. Daniel moved slightly closer, his jaw tight. But Bruce raised one hand almost imperceptibly, a gesture that said, "Stay back," without any words needing to pass between them. "Why?" Bruce looked at the man for a long moment. His eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger but with something closer to diagnostic assessment, as if he were examining a particularly interesting problem. "That's your question. Do I think I'm tough?" "Yeah," the visitor crossed his arms over his broad chest. "That's my question. Because from where I'm standing, you look pretty small, pretty breakable, and I'm wondering if all this..." He gestured vaguely. At the dojo, the students, the equipment, is just theater, just dance moves for the camera. The insult was delivered casually, almost lazily, which made it land harder. There was no heat in it, no emotion, just cold dismissal. Bruce didn't react, didn't stiffen, didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he took a slow breath and walked toward one of the benches lining the wall. He picked up a towel, wiped his hands carefully, and sat down. The motion was unhurried, deliberate, as if he had all the time in the world. The visitor frowned slightly, confused by the lack of response. He clearly expected anger, defensiveness, or challenge. Instead, he was getting nothing, or at least nothing he recognized as a reaction. Bruce gestured to the empty space beside him on the bench. Sit. The single word was delivered softly, almost gently, but it carried unmistakable authority. The visitor hesitated. This wasn't going the way confrontations usually went. There was supposed to be posturing, escalation, eventually violence or submission, but this small man in sweat-soaked clothes was offering him a seat like they were about to have tea. I didn't come here to sit and chat, old man. Bruce wasn't old. He was 31, but the insult was reflexive, another attempt to provoke. I know why you came. Bruce's voice remained even. You came to test yourself against something you don't understand. You came because you're strong and you want confirmation that your strength makes you superior. You came because someone told you about me and it bothered you that they spoke with respect. He paused. So sit and I'll answer your question. There was something in the tone, not threat, not challenge, but absolute confidence that made the visitor pause. After a moment, he walked over and sat heavily on the bench, his weight making the wood creak. He kept his arms crossed, his posture aggressive and closed. Bruce turned to look at him directly. Up close, the size difference was even more pronounced. The visitor had at least 6 inches and 60 pounds on him, massive hands that looked like they could crush bone, a neck thick with muscle. Do I think I'm tough? Bruce repeated the question slowly, as if tasting each word. No, I don't think I'm tough. The visitor's eyebrows rose. Several students exchanged surprised glances. This wasn't the answer anyone expected. Bruce continued, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the silent dojo. Tough is a word people use when they don't understand what they're looking at. Tough is external. It's armor. It's the shell you build to protect the parts of yourself you're afraid to examine. He paused, letting that sink in. You think you're tough. I can see it in how you walk, how you stand, how you speak. You've built your entire identity around physical dominance, around being harder, stronger, more dangerous than the people around you. The visitor's jaw tightened slightly. He started to speak, but Bruce raised one finger, a simple gesture that somehow commanded silence. But toughness is not strength. Toughness is fear wearing a mask. Real strength, real strength is something entirely different. Oh yeah, the visitor's voice had an edge now. Enlighten me, master. The last word dripped with sarcasm. Bruce stood up. He walked to the center of the training floor and gestured for the visitor to follow. After a moment's hesitation, the larger man stood and walked over, his movements confident and aggressive. Bruce pointed to a heavy bag hanging nearby, a worn leather cylinder that had absorbed thousands of strikes. Hit that as hard as you can. The visitor smiled. This was familiar territory. This was something he understood. He rolled his shoulders, set his stance, and drove his fist into the bag with tremendous force. The impact was loud, explosive, the kind of sound that makes people flinch. The bag swung wildly on its chain, the metal links rattling. 300 pounds of force, Bruce said quietly, as if he'd measured it precisely just by watching. Maybe more impressive. You're strong, physically powerful. If that punch lands on a person, they go down. No question. The visitor grinned, pleased with himself. Now watch, Bruce said. He approached the bag, didn't set his stance the way boxers do, feet planted wide and solid. Instead, he stood almost casually, weight balanced, hands loose at his sides. Then, in a motion almost too fast to track, he struck. The sound was different. Not the heavy thud of the visitor's punch, but something sharper, crisper. The bag didn't swing wildly, it seemed to compress, folding inward around the point of impact, then exploding backward with more force than the visitor's much heavier strike. The chain rattled differently, with a higher, more frantic pitch. Several students gasped. The visitor's expression shifted from confidence to confusion to something resembling concern. Bruce stepped back, his breathing unchanged. He wasn't even winded. Toughness is hitting hard because you're angry or afraid or trying to prove something, he said. Strength is hitting precisely because you understand structure, leverage, body mechanics, and efficiency. Toughness is external. Strength is internal. He turned to face the visitor directly. You asked if I think I'm tough? I'll ask you a different question. Do you think toughness makes you powerful? The visitor stared at him, working his jaw. His hands had curled into fists unconsciously. You came here to test me, Bruce continued, to see if I'm real or just talk, to see if you could take me. And the answer is, he paused and for the first time, something like a smile touched his lips, not mocking, but genuinely warm. You're asking the wrong question. What the hell does that mean? Bruce walked slowly around him in a circle, his movement fluid and unhurried. The visitor turned to track him, staying defensive. It means that fighting isn't about toughness. It's not about who can absorb more pain or deliver more damage. That's what people who don't understand combat think fighting is. Real fighting, real martial art, is about understanding your opponent, understanding yourself, understanding the space between action and reaction. He stopped in front of the visitor again. You could hit me. Maybe you'd land a punch. You're fast for your size, well-trained, dangerous. But hitting me wouldn't prove you're tougher. It would just prove you're willing to resort to violence when your ego feels threatened. And what would you gain? A story bragging rights? The temporary satisfaction of dominating someone smaller? Bruce's voice dropped lower, more intense. And what would you lose? The visitor frowned. What are you talking about? You'd lose the opportunity to learn. You'd lose the chance to understand something beyond your current comprehension. You'd lose the possibility of becoming more than what you already are. Bruce's eyes locked onto his. Toughness wants to destroy what it doesn't understand. Strength wants to grow by understanding what challenges it. The silence that followed was profound. The visitor stood there, his massive frame somehow looking less imposing, his aggressive posture beginning to crack, his fists slowly unclenched. He looked down at his hands, then back at Bruce, and something had shifted in his expression. The mockery was gone. The swagger had evaporated. What remained was confusion, vulnerability, and the beginning of something that might have been respect. I don't, he started, stopped, tried again. His voice was quieter now, less certain. I don't understand. I know, Bruce said gently. That's why you came here with aggression instead of curiosity. That's why you asked if I think I'm tough, instead of asking what I've learned about strength. That's why you wanted to fight instead of wanting to grow. He paused. But you're here now, so let me ask you something. Why do you need to be tough? What are you protecting? What are you afraid people will see if you let that armor down? The question landed like a physical blow. The visitor's mouth opened, closed, his eyes widened slightly. No one had ever asked him that before. No one had ever looked past the size, the strength, the intimidating presence, and asked what was underneath. His voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat. I grew up in a place where if you weren't tough, you didn't survive, where weakness got you hurt, got you taken advantage of. So I made sure nobody could hurt me, made sure I was always the strongest, the most dangerous, the one people feared. Bruce nodded slowly. And it worked. You survived. You became powerful. You built yourself into something formidable. He moved closer, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, but somehow still carrying clearly. But now you're not surviving anymore. You're living. And what works for survival doesn't always work for life. The armor that protected you is now isolating you. The toughness that made you safe is now making you alone. The visitor's eyes were glistening. His jaw clenched, unclenched. His breathing had become irregular. One of his hands came up unconsciously to his chest, pressing against his sternum as if checking for a wound. How do you... He couldn't finish the sentence. Because I see you, Bruce said simply. Not the armor. You, the person underneath who's tired of always fighting, always proving, always being hard. The person who came here not really to test me, but hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone would be strong enough to show you that there's another way. A sound escaped the visitor's throat, half laugh, half sob. He looked away, blinking rapidly, one hand coming up to his face. His shoulders, so broad and imposing moments ago, now seemed to curl inward slightly, as if he were trying to make himself smaller, less visible. The students watched in stunned silence. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't even really a confrontation anymore. It was something else entirely. Something none of them had words for, but all of them felt in the marrow of their bones. Bruce placed a hand on the man's shoulder. The gesture was small, gentle, but the larger man reacted as if he'd been struck. His head dropped forward. His breathing became ragged. Strength, Bruce said quietly, is being able to destroy someone and choosing not to. Strength is being able to humiliate someone and choosing instead to help them understand. Strength is looking at someone who came to hurt you and seeing not an enemy, but a person in pain, lashing out because they don't know any other way. The visitor's hands were shaking now. He pressed them against his thighs, trying to still them, but couldn't. You asked if I think I'm tough, Bruce continued. Here's my answer. I know what I'm capable of. I know I could hurt you badly before you even realized I'd moved. I've trained my entire life to understand violence at its most fundamental level. Not just how to deliver it, but how to break it down, optimize it, make it as efficient and devastating as possible. But that's not what makes me strong. What makes me strong is that I can do all of that and choose not to. What makes me strong is that I can see you standing here, aggressive and insulting, and recognize that you're not my enemy. You're my student. You just didn't know it yet. Student, the word came out rough, barely audible. Everyone is a student if they're willing to learn, and everyone is a teacher if they're willing to share what they've learned. Bruce stepped back, giving the man space. You came here to prove something. And you did. You proved that you're strong enough to be vulnerable. You prove that underneath all that armor is someone brave enough to feel. You prove that toughness can crack open to reveal strength. The visitor finally looked up. His eyes were red, wet. His face was a map of confusion and something that might have been hope. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I don't know how to be anything else. I know, Bruce said, but that's why you're here. Not to test me. To learn. So he gestured to the training floor around them. Learn. The man stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he nodded. Just once. A small motion, but it carried the weight of surrender, not defeat. But the kind of surrender that means laying down weapons you no longer need. Bruce turned to address the entire dojo, his voice carrying authority but no harshness. This is what martial arts is. Not technique, not toughness, not violence. It's understanding. It's transformation. It's looking at what threatens you and asking not how do I destroy this, but what can I learn from this? How can I grow? How can I help this person grow? He looked back at the visitor. What's your name? Marcus. Marcus. Bruce extended his hand. Welcome. Marcus looked at the offered hand like it was a foreign object, something he didn't quite know how to process. Then slowly, he reached out and took it. His grip was careful, almost delicate, as if he were afraid of breaking something fragile and precious. They shook hands. The room remained silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer tense, expectant, dangerous. It was reverent, sacred almost. Bruce released Marcus's hand and walked to a bench, retrieving a training manual he kept there. He held it out. Start with this. Read it tonight. Come back tomorrow. Not to prove anything, not to test anything, just to learn. Marcus took the book with trembling hands. He looked down at the cover, then back at Bruce, then at the book again. His throat worked as he tried to find words. Finally, he managed. Why? After what I said? Because destroying you would be easy and would teach you nothing. Helping you transform teaches us both something. Bruce's expression was calm, open. I'm not interested in easy. I'm interested in true. Marcus nodded, clutching the book to his chest like a lifeline. Thank you, he whispered. Then louder, thank you. He turned and walked toward the door, his gait completely different from his entrance. Where before he'd swaggered with aggressive confidence, now he moved carefully, as if the ground beneath him had become uncertain, requiring new attention and respect. At the door, he paused and looked back. Bruce raised one hand in a simple gesture of acknowledgement. Marcus returned it, then stepped through the door and was gone. The dojo remained silent for several heartbeats after his departure. Then, like air rushing back into a vacuum, sound returned. Students exhaled. Someone whispered to someone else. Daniel approached Bruce, shaking his head in wonder. Sifu, how did you know? Bruce smiled slightly, picking up his towel again and wiping his face. Know what? What he needed, what to say, how to… I didn't know, Bruce interrupted gently. I paid attention. I listened not to his words, but to what his words were trying to hide. I looked not at his armor, but at what the armor was protecting. He turned to face his students, all of whom were now gathered around him in a loose circle. This is the highest level of martial art. Not defeating your opponent. Transforming them. Not winning the fight, ending the need for the fight. One of the younger students, a teenager named Kevin, raised his hand tentatively. But Sifu, what if he hadn't listened? What if he'd attacked? Bruce considered the question seriously. Then I would have defended myself efficiently, definitively, but that would have been the failure, not the success. The success is what you just witnessed. Violence transformed into understanding, aggression transformed into humility, an enemy transformed into a student. But how? Kevin pressed. How do you do that? How do you know what to say? Bruce walked to the center of the training floor. The sunlight through the high windows had shifted, the geometric slabs of light now cutting across the space at different angles, illuminating him from the side so half his face was bright and half was shadowed. You ask what drives the aggression, what pain is underneath the anger, what fear is underneath the toughness. You see people not as obstacles or opponents, but as human beings carrying invisible weight, fighting invisible battles. And you meet them there, in that human space, rather than meeting them in the space where they want to fight. He paused, looking at each student in turn. Marcus didn't come here to fight me. Not really. He came here hoping someone would be strong enough to stop him from fighting. He came here hoping someone would see past his armor and recognize the person underneath who is exhausted from always having to be hard. He came here hoping to be defeated, not physically, but philosophically, to have his worldview challenged in a way that opened a door rather than closing it. And if he'd been wrong, Daniel asked, if he really did just want to fight? Bruce's expression became serious, almost grave. Then I still would have tried first to reach him as a human being. Because the risk of trying and failing is small compared to the loss of not trying at all. If you assume everyone is an enemy, everyone becomes an enemy. If you assume everyone is a potential teacher or student, everyone becomes an opportunity. He clapped his hands together once, the sharp sound cutting through the philosophical heaviness. But enough talk, back to training, and pay attention. Because what happened here today, it's what you're actually training for. Not the tournaments, not the demonstrations, not the fights. You're training for the moment when someone threatens you and you have the skill to destroy them, but the wisdom to transform them instead. That's mastery. Everything else is just preparation. The students bowed and dispersed back to their training stations. The rhythms of the dojo resumed. The thud of fists on bags, the slap of feet on mats, the sharp exhalations of breath coordinated with strikes. But something had changed. There was a new quality to the attention. A deeper seriousness, as if everyone in that space now understood that what they were learning had implications far beyond the physical. Bruce returned to the wooden dummy. His movements were the same, precise, controlled, rhythmic. But now they carried visible intention that transcended technique. Each strike was a question. Each block was an answer. Each movement was a conversation with something deeper than wood and leather. Daniel stood nearby, watching, and after several minutes worked up the courage to speak. Sifu, will he come back, Marcus? Bruce didn't stop his training, but his voice carried clearly between strikes. Yes, tomorrow and the day after. And he'll train harder than anyone here because he has more to learn. Not about fighting, about himself, about strength, about what it means to be powerful without being hard. Strike, block, strike. He'll be a good student because the people who fight hardest against learning are the ones who need it most. And once they break through their own resistance, they transform faster and deeper than anyone else. How do you know? Bruce stopped then, stepping back from the dummy. He turned to face Daniel with an expression of profound gentleness. Because that's who I was years ago. Angry, aggressive, using martial arts as a weapon against the world instead of a tool. For understanding it, someone saw past my armor. Someone was patient enough to show me what I was really fighting. Someone was strong enough to help me stop. Your teacher, one of them, and now I do the same. I see the armor, I recognize it because I wore it, and I help people take it off. Not all at once, not violently, but slowly, carefully, showing them that what's underneath is stronger than anything they could build on top. He placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. That's the real lesson. Not the techniques, not the forms, not the speed or power or precision. The real lesson is the strongest thing you can do is help someone else become strong. The most powerful thing you can do is give your power away to those who need it. The most masterful thing you can do is create other masters. Daniel nodded slowly, the weight of the words settling into him. Bruce smiled. Now back to training. And stay focused because you never know when the next Marcus will walk through that door, and when he does, I want you ready. Not to fight him, to see him. 15 years later, in a boxing gym in Chicago, a young heavyweight fighter named Marcus Payne was training a teenager who'd come in aggressive and hostile, looking for a fight. The kid was talented, but angry, using his fists as weapons against a world that terrified him. Marcus stopped the kid mid-swing and sat him down on a bench. The teenager bristled, defensive, ready to explode. And Marcus smiled, not with mockery, but with profound gentleness, and asked, "You think you're tough?" The kid stared at him, confused by the question, by the tone, by the lack of aggression. And Marcus began to talk, not about boxing, not about technique, but about armor, about fear, about the difference between toughness and strength. He talked about a dojo in Los Angeles, about a small man who'd seen past Marcus's size and swagger to the terrified person underneath. He talked about the day someone strong enough had helped him stop fighting. The teenager listened, and slowly, over the course of an hour, his fists unclenched, his shoulders dropped, his armor began to crack, and when he left the gym that night, he carried a training manual under his arm and something new in his chest, something fragile and precious and just beginning to grow. Marcus watched him go, then turned back to the heavy bag. He struck it once, not with the explosive, angry power of his youth, but with that crisp, precise efficiency he'd learned years ago. The bag compressed, exploded backward, the chain rattled with that particular sound that meant perfect structure, perfect efficiency, perfect understanding. He smiled, and somewhere, in the space between past and future, between teacher and student, between toughness and strength, a small man in a sweat-soaked shirt continued his eternal conversation with a wooden dummy, each strike a question, each block an answer, teaching the world that true power isn't found in how hard you can hit, but in how carefully you choose when not to. The lesson echoes still, in every dojo where a teacher sees past armor to the person underneath. In every moment when someone strong enough chooses transformation over destruction. In every question that asks not "Are you tough?" but "Are you ready to be strong?" Now ask yourself, who in your life is wearing armor? Who's fighting because they don't know how to stop? Who's aggressive because they're terrified? And more importantly, are you strong enough to see them, brave enough to reach them, wise enough to help them transform? Or will you meet their toughness with your own, their armor with yours, their fight with violence, proving nothing except that pain creates more pain and hardness creates more hardness? The choice, as always, is yours. But remember, real strength isn't measured by who you can defeat. It's measured by who you can transform, starting perhaps with yourself,